Hi, everyone. My name's Mikaley. I am here at Tattered Cover Bookstore. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you guys here. This is amazing, and I'm so excited to have you guys joining us. It's going to be a great event that we have here. We are celebrating the book, The Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Your House, and it is wonderful. I finished it just this morning because I had to fall asleep last night, but I could barely put it down, and it was so great. And we're joined here with Jeffrey Cranor and Joseph Fink. And I just want to first give you a couple of updates on how Tattered Cover's doing. We're still doing deliveries. We're still having online orders. So thank you for your support. We're so excited that you guys are showing us all this love and support through your online orders and your talks on social media. We really can't thank you guys enough. We know this is a hard time on everybody, and it's just really kind to hear from you all in this way. So thank you so much for that. We are continuing with our delivery service. We are having all of these different live events, which is really great. We have some amazing live streams coming up. Like on Thursday, we have the Choose Your Own Adventure writing workshop. So if you ever wanted to know how to write your Choose Your Own Adventure book, this is the place to do it. We have author Catherine Factor, who's going to be joining us on Thursday, April 23rd at 5 o'clock. And we have more events coming in May as well. One thing that I do want to say is why we're doing this, which is something that we've been saying at the beginning of all of our live streams. And we firmly believe that art is a survival resource, and it is an essential. And it's something that's vitally important, but has very few safety nets when it comes to crises like this, unfortunately. And Tattered Cover's here to affirm that creative work is essential, and we want to elevate it, and we want it to always be our top priority when it comes to sharing stories and making sure that other people can experience them. It's vitally important, and the authors that we picked are authors that we think that you will all enjoy and that we enjoy in our stores. I can't tell you how many fans of Night Vale that we have on our staff. Some people are so jealous that I'm getting to do this today. And I want to say hi to my staff because I know a lot of them are watching right now. Thank you guys so much. And then, we believe that our communities need books and need independent bookstores, but this is something that we want to offer to you. We're a community space. And while we cannot be physically in our community space, we're going to do it here online in the best way that we can. This video is going to be available on YouTube afterwards. And we hope that you continue to watch our live streams, and you can share this with your friends afterwards because it's going to be a great time. But I want to move on now from all of that business stuff and talk about the amazing storytellers that we have today, because calling them just writers seems so minimal. These gentlemen know how to tell a story, and they know how to do it in so many different formats. So Joseph Fink created Welcome to Night Vale and Alice Isn't Dead podcasts. He lives with his wife in the Hudson River Valley in Los Angeles. He's also the author of the novel Alice Isn't Dead. Jeffrey Cranor co-writes Welcome to Night Vale and Within the Wires podcast. He also co-creates theater and dance pieces with his choreographer / wife, Jillian Sweeney, and they live in New York. Together, they're the authors of the New York Times bestselling novels Welcome to Night Vale, It Devours, and 4 Welcome to Night Vale episode script books, Mostly Void, partially stars, The Great Glowing Coils of the Universe, Buying Lot 37, and Who's a Good Boy. And they are wonderful, amazing. And for more on Welcome to Night Vale and upcoming events and on the books, you can visit welcometonightVale.com. It is my honor to welcome both Jeffrey Cranor and Joseph Fink, and I will turn on their videos and their microphones now. Here we
Great.
Go. Yay!
I think we did it.
Welcome. Hello.
Thanks, Mikaley.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for this. This is amazing. Like I said, I know I've had a lot of staff members who are just super jealous and really excited to be watching this right now.
I'm really glad to be here. I'm so glad you invited us. Thank you.
Absolutely, our pleasure. So I would love to start this off if you guys could talk about this third book that you guys have, The Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Your Home, which, holy crap, yes, thank you for holding it up. I have the audiobook version, which is by the wonderful Mara Wilson, who does an incredible job. And so I don't have anything to hold up. But I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of a taste of what this book is, and then maybe a reading, which would be a pretty cool treat.
So the Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Your Home is a longtime Night Vale character, and Jeffrey and I were always super interested in what her story was, and we decided to figure it out and tell it to you. And going in, kind of the thing I was excited about was really branching outside of Night Vale into this larger world um, that Night Vale that is Night Vale esque, but is outside of the town limits. And so we start in 18th century Europe, and we go all over the world to places both real and imagined. There's pirates and heists and revenge and a lot of plot twists,
And a
and
love
also
story, kind of.
and there's a love story, kind of, and there's a faceless old woman who secretly lives in your home. Jeffrey, do you want to read? Do you want me to read? What are we doing?
Sure, I can do a little reading. I'll grab you guys just grab you guys a little teaser from the very first chapter. This book goes back and forth between present day and up to more than 2 centuries in the past, tracking the faceless old woman's life. This is the opening chapter. It is called Craig, 2011. I set your shoes on fire, all of them. They're in the trash can by the rental office. They're still smoldering. The side of the plastic bin has melted away, and Stuart in apartment 413 has already made 4 calls to the super. He didn't answer because I locked him in his bathroom, because I didn't want the fire put out just yet. It's nice, the smell of burning. I used to not like it, as it reminded me of a particularly bad moment in my early life. But that was so many years ago, and now I enjoy the smell of burning. Burning anything: rubber, cloth, skin in small amounts, hair, definitely hair, even wood. A fireplace on a cool winter night, a campfire on a warm summer night, a house as a family of 4 flees, leaving behind everything they've ever owned to be consumed by flames. Plus, there's true beauty in black ash quivering around bright orange edges. It's art, Craig. I know you appreciate art. Also, the birds are alarmed, and I find that funny. You missed your date tonight because you couldn't find your shoes, which is why I'm telling you now that they're on fire in a quickly melting plastic bin. Then, when you tried to rush to a shoe store, your car wouldn't start because someone broke in and jammed glass shards into the ignition. Or at least that's what the locksmith said when she came to investigate the problem. Who would do something like that? You wanted her professional opinion. She only shrugged and said she'd have to replace the ignition switch, which would take a couple of days and cost $400. I suppose I could have used the glass shards to slash your tires to keep you from your date. It would have been cheaper for you, but it wouldn't have been as beautiful. I don't think you noticed the perfect arc of blood splatter across the floor mat when you cut your hand on the ignition. You screamed in pain, ignoring the beauty of your own nature. So please take a moment to look out the window by the shower and appreciate the artwork I have created. I call it Craig's Impertinence, Multimedia, Plastic, Gasoline, and Shoes. Ah, but you're too busy moping. You've been standing in that shower for 10 minutes. I know, because I'm in here with you. A faceless old woman inches from your neck. You would feel my breath if I still breathed. I think it would be upsetting for you if you turned around. Better to let the water run over you. Better not to see. You haven't even touched the soap. You look pathetic. Why? Because you missed a date with a woman who was pretty and shared similar loves and seemed genuinely interested in you? Or because when you went to try to reschedule with her, she accused you of texting her an inappropriate photo when in fact you did no such thing? You can't hear me. These are rhetorical questions anyway. I don't need a response. You wouldn't even know to respond to me. After all, you don't know I'm here. Even after that one day a year ago when you passed by the living room and half noticed the strange new chandelier hanging from the ceiling, the one made from the twisted limbs and neck of an old woman, contorted into the shape of a spider. And then you thought, wait, what did I just see? And you backed up to find that the hanging old woman was gone, almost certain she was never there. Probably you imagined that. There you go.
Oh, so good. And there's, oh my gosh, it's funny hearing that back, having, like I said, finished it this morning, that, oh, that's a great first chapter. Well done.
Thanks.
Well done, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Thank you.
She's a lot of fun to write for.
I'm sure. That's one of the questions that I wanted to talk about was her voice. And so obviously there's two of you writing this together, and you've been a writing duo for a long time. And so obviously you've got your system worked out, but how was it delving into her voice? And how was it finding it through such a longer story than maybe the other mediums that she was first introduced in?
It was interesting early on, like one of the first things we wrote besides the first chapter, which is very much in her voice as it is on the podcast,
Mhm.
was the first flashback in which she's a child. And I just kind of made a spur of the moment choice to write that not in the Faceless Old Woman's narrative voice, but more in a kind of traditional, like 19th century adventure story voice. Not quite as stylized as that, but it was definitely a different voice. And then we kind of talked about, is that okay? And that's when we made this decision to kind of have her voice change through the flashbacks to become more and more like her present day. So voice was definitely something we thought about a lot, especially because the narrative voice of the podcast, through the character of Cecil, and then the kind of third person narrative of the first two novels, both kind of shared a similar sense of humor and feel to them that this one we knew couldn't have because it was coming from a different person. We gave a lot of thought to it, but it's a very fun voice to write in, so it never felt like that much hard work.
That's, I mean, you can feel that, especially because you take such a journey with the woman that it obviously she has to grow and change as a character is wont to do in a story like this, but you do feel those times of fun and mischievousness and man, she's weird, but in the best way. But one of the things that I noticed about her voice was she has such descriptions of the five senses and really goes into smell as one of them. And like she talks about the sea and wet dog and burning, and those are really visceral visceral scenes that you're given. And so what about the woman drew you to that perspective of emphasizing the five senses in that way? Because you spend quite a bit of time on them.
When we first started outlining the book, we had the notion from the get-go. We sort of knew how we wanted to end it. We knew that it was sort of the biography or the autobiography of this character. And we knew we wanted to structure it with 5 flashbacks of her life, interspersed with these modern day chapters, like the one I just read, where she's in the home of a man named Craig. And then when we first started talking, Joseph approached with this idea for structuring each of the 5 chapters that they're all sort of centered around, or they at least sprout from one of the 5 senses. And so the very first chapter is smell. The very first flashback section is smell. So it starts with, this is what a wet dog smells like. This is what an orange smells like, things of that nature. And so each of those chapters, and they're not, we didn't make an effort to we didn't want to be heavy-handed with it constantly, but each one kind of begins and ends with those senses, and kind of throughout we sort of used the sense of which of the 5 senses in this section we're sort of dealing with here, as sort of a touchstone. It's an interesting way as a writer to kind of focus your attention and your energies when writing a passage.
Again, you can definitely get that sense, for lack of a better sorry, Beth. Anyway,
when you write something like this, it is interesting because you spend so much time on these little, the smell we knew people would notice because we spend a lot of time talking about it in the first flashback. But the other flashbacks, I think the senses they emphasize are maybe less noticeable, because they're just kind of woven into the descriptions. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about that, but we knew that it probably wouldn't be noticed by a lot of people, and that's kind of okay. Sometimes it's there's so much kind of stuff we thought about structurally. There's also the last sentence of every flashback leads into the sense that is emphasized in the next flashback. We did a lot of structural thinking that was just kind of there for us and less for the reader.
I picked up on it. Like the last
That's
section
awesome.
with touch was so, oh gosh, it felt agonizing almost without giving too much away. But I love that you guys also picked the 5 senses, and like it follows the 5-act structure, and it you can tell you put a lot of time in structure, and but also a lot of time again in this character and how she it I don't know, just how her voice is and how she comes across and how she evolves and changes. And that was one of the things that I also thought about, was just this book takes place over literal centuries and over many countries. And you know, you already mentioned that you spent a lot of time on the planning of the plot and the structure, but like, how did you decide what moments to put in and what moments to put out? Because some you go into such detail with, and others are glazed over a little bit more, which is, you know, the challenge of every writer. But I'm curious how that worked for the both of you.
I think, yeah, I mean, we kind of knew the story we wanted to tell. So we figured out the structure in terms of story of kind of, we knew here's her childhood and here's the defining, you know, event of her childhood, which leads into her kind of young adulthood. And here's the defining, what is that flashback ultimately about, and kind of figuring out what each flashback is ultimately trying to convey. You can kind of figure out the time period. Some, you know, the childhood one, I think, takes her up to 14, 13, somewhere in there. I might be misremembering that. And so it's 13 years, but then the last flashback is, or not the last, the second to last flashback is a good portion of her life. It's several decades. And the last flashback is literally over a century. And that's just kind of the necessity of what each of those are trying to convey, especially, you know, the one that takes place over a long period of time. That long period of time is part of the story it's trying to tell. And so kind of the time frame of that became tied to the story we were telling there.
Yeah, when we outline a novel, you know, we do pretty detailed breakdowns of each chapter. You know, like I say pretty detailed, like it's usually a paragraph or two that kind of, it's just everything that should be happening in there. And then I find a lot of freedom in being able to write within that, because you know, in an outline you don't get that much detail, so it's a lot of fun to sort of like already kind of have the framework for what in these, say, 2,000 words I need to write. You know, what has to happen here, and then you can kind of fill it out with different adventures. And in the case of the Faceless Old Woman, there's these like 5 big, like 14,000 word long chapters that you have so much more room to really develop you know, new characters and friends and enemies, and you know, develop the background and the sensory, you know, all the you know, the senses that she feels in those places, and then to kind of just have fun with it. You know, to be able to say, well, she's out on the high seas and she's doing swashbuckling sort of things, so let's make something kind of swashbuckling here. And then you can kind of really get into that, because the outline might just say swashbuckling thing happens. And so, and then you get to really dive into that, to whatever that is. But yeah, as Joseph was saying, so much of it has to do with like how much time you're moving past. And you know, one of those big sections of her flashback is you know, takes place over more than 100 years. So you some of it you move very quickly through decades at a time, and then sometimes you stop for just, you know, you spend pages upon pages over on something that takes place over just a few minutes.
Yeah. No, I thank you for that. It's good to know. But you talk about the swashbuckling and talk about the, you know, the different centuries, and how much research went into this.
As little as we could get away with. It's weird because it ended up, I mean, I've seen people refer to this as kind of historical fiction, which I sort of could see, but it's really not, because it takes place in this alternate version of history that we could sort of bend to our will, mainly because, like, the reason I got into writing surrealist fiction is because I hate research. And so the thing about writing about like a weird desert town is no one can ever be like, oh, you know, actually that story isn't in Weird Desert Towns. Whereas like my nightmare is writing an actual historical fiction novel. I know I've said this before at events, but like the thing I always think about is the chair, because what's going to happen is your character is going to sit in a chair, and then someone's going to be like, oh, actually they didn't have that kind of chair at that time, and you're going to feel terrible, and it's just all of these little details. It just becomes overwhelming. I can't. God bless historical fiction writers. I don't know how they do that. So yeah, for us, like Jeffrey had to do a bit on the boats, and I did a lot of like Googling, like what was up in Hamburg at this time. And I can tell you the answer was always Napoleon had conquered it. So that made that easier.
How was the boat research?
Boat research was fun. It began with the question of what are types of boats? And when I was in college, I was briefly a history major in college, and then I got really into. I took 2 classes on naval history. I just really was like, this is my thing. I really love naval history. And then I had like a very brief like Herman Melville fascination, and just was like, the boats are cool. And then whatever, I moved off of that eventually, but I've always sort of been fascinated with it. So I did remember a little bit of the terminology, but it didn't quite fit, because a lot of what I remembered from that class was like American naval history, and it really was about like late 1800s and on into the early 1900s. So there was a lot of like looking up of like, what's the difference between a cutter and a sloop, what's a brig, what's a frigate, what are these things, and just making sure that we had that. And I tried not to be too specific. I mean, to Joseph's point about like not doing too much research is that like, I'm like, the important thing is not all of the parts of the boat. The important thing is what's happening with these characters, and not being distracting with information that is completely totally wrong and takes the reader out of the story. So I tried not to do so much research that I was filling the writing with details that were unimportant. But yeah, it really was like, just it would every now and then it would come along that something about the mast, and I'm like, would they say just mast, or would it be mizzen mast or top mast? Like I just need to make sure that we're saying the right word here.
I didn't feel burdened down by the information, and I'm curious because I'm, as a reader of many genres because of my profession, that it's always just interesting to me how much information the writer looks up. And I did an interview, a live stream a week or 2 ago with this nonfiction writer, and she talked all about her research, and so it's always just very interesting to me to learn where that process comes from. That being said, I want to know too about these characters that you came up with. We mentioned them. You were saying that it's not so much the research, but it's more of what these characters are doing on the boat, not necessarily what the boat is called. And you have a great crew of side characters that I'm a fan of side characters. You can ask anyone. My friend Allison jokes all the time. She's like, man, if you could just read a book about just side characters. And I was like, but they wouldn't be the side characters. That's not the point. I would love it if you could talk about them a little bit more, not necessarily going into anything too spoilery, but they are so talented and so fascinating. And how did they come to be? And will we see them again?
A lot of them come in, not all of them, but a lot of them come in part 2.
Yes.
Where, not to spoil too much, but she's involved with a group of thieves, and
we've mentioned swashbuckling. Like we've hit on that. This is a Pirates of the Caribbean adjacent type adventure.
So she's got. So I was writing the rough draft of that, and she's got this band of thieves, and I kind of was like, well, if she has a band of thieves, they kind of each need to be a person. Like you can't. It's not like in a movie or something where if they're not important, you can just have a group of people standing in the background and never really talk about them. Like I had to figure out. So yeah, I mean, I'm very fond of that band of thieves as well. I spent a lot of time thinking through their stories. I don't know if we'll see them. I kind of had that temptation to try to bring them back towards the end of the book in a way that wouldn't have made sense, just because I liked them so much. And eventually I had to be like, this doesn't actually serve the story to try to jam them in some way after the point where it makes any sense.
Fair.
So there's that group. There's other characters that kind of came in with the boat as well.
Yes.
Yeah, it's yeah, I think it's a really great point. You have to think about them as actual people rather than just archetypes or just, cardboard cutouts or supernumeraries. This idea of like giving them their own kind of wants and needs and desires, and because the title character's life takes place over centuries, as long as she's around these characters, each time she runs into them over years sometimes, and so you want to show their lives and their progressions and see where they've gone and how it fits in what they want from their lives and what they want to happen, and why they do things. And I always think that just makes strong characters, whether it's the side character or whether it's the main character, of having the basic want and need, and then plus they just all have really fascinating backgrounds. There's people like Rivka, who's really fascinating, who
One of
has
my
such a rich and storied history and has done so much from her past, with her ability to disguise herself, and people like the bloodthirsty Vlad, who is but also deeply in love, and these sort of like complex characters are really really fun to create. I always find it fun to create morally complicated characters, and I think that's part of that balance too.
touching on that, as you guys have created so many stories and so many characters, and obviously have developed this universe among many other side stories and side weaves. What is it like to jump from medium to medium? Obviously you guys are storytellers. I mentioned it in my introduction, like that just seems to be a natural part of who you are. But there's obviously different talents and different knacks and tricks of the trade that come with having a script versus a novel. And how do you guys jump from those? And how do you decide which story belongs in which medium?
Generally, we start with the medium, I would say. Like we know, okay, we're going to write a novel, and then we kind of figure out from there what are stories for a novel. Like I think we rarely come up with a story first and then try to figure out what medium it fits, because they do, even when you're writing for the same world, they do fundamentally work differently. With a podcast, because it's audio only, and it's being performed, you have to think about, you keep sentences short and use word combinations that like a human being can easily say with their mouth, and repeat important things so that somebody listening can kind of follow along and not lose the thread of what's happening. Whereas with like a live show, we write a lot for the audience's energy, like where's the audience at, and what are the moments we kind of want to guide them through. And then with the novel, that's when we can really stretch out and do bigger stories and bigger things with language. You can write much longer, more complex sentences in a novel than you can in audio. Jeffrey, I don't know if...
No, yeah, I think that's exactly it. And I think when because we started with the podcast back in 2012, and then we wanted to make, we're theater people and writers, so we wanted to make books and we wanted to make live shows. And yeah, when we did our first novel, Welcome to Night Vale, a novel, when we did our first novel, one, we wanted to not novelize the podcast. We wanted just to tell a separate story, so that way if you're at Tattered Cover and you just see the amazing cover art of any of the Night Vale novels, you can just grab it and you don't need
Y'all
to
got
know
so lucky with your cover art. Can I just say, I know that's a
Oh,
really side note, but you got so lucky.
we are very lucky because we get to work direct, because the cover artist for all three of our novels is Rob Wilson, the same man who did our logo.
Oh, that's
And so Harper Perennial was so open to working with Rob, and so it's been a real blessing to be authors who get to like have input on our cover art. It's so great. But yeah, I think when we set out to write that first novel, we wanted to make this separate story that just exists on its own, no matter what other awareness you have of Night Vale. And then also it gave us a chance to like get out of Night Vale, get out of Cecil's voice, to just put your feet on the ground and walk around town. And the same thing with the Faceless Old Woman, that just feels like she has such a long life. It would never we could probably tell it over many, many episodes of the podcast, but it just wouldn't. I don't think it would feel the same as with the novel.
I'm curious though too, because you know, you guys have so many different podcasts, and you have built this brand and built this world and these storytelling. And one of the ones that I actually knew you guys from with it before Night Vale was Start With This. I had found that, and it's so for those of you who don't know, Start This is your podcast about how you put creative ideas in motion. And I'm curious because you obviously have a lot of advice for writers and creators and storytellers. You started a podcast about it, but could you share with us maybe one crucial piece of advice, maybe one that applied to your process when writing The Faceless Old Woman?
It's interesting. I mean, I think with Start With This, more than anything, when we began that podcast, so much of it was less about like prescriptions for how to write than just how Joseph and I approach writing, and hopefully it's useful to you. But I think the message of that is because in every episode of Start With This, we kind of discuss a topic, and then at the end we give 2 assignments, something to read or listen to or watch, and then something to create, like a short form writing assignment with parameters. And so I think that the message of that whole podcast and of any advice we've ever given as writers is you just have to keep writing. You just have to keep doing it all the time, every day. Like it's a muscle. And I know that's not a new metaphor, but that's basically true. And I think for this, one of the things we also talk about is I think is having a structure for yourself, and whether that we use word counts, to kind of give ourselves
You guys
a
still hear me?
Oh, I hear you now. You're frozen on my screen. Did I freeze on yours?
I can see and hear you great.
Oh, okay.
She's frozen. Yeah.
Oh,
I would say keep going.
I'm gonna keep talking, and then Mikaley can jump back in when it's frozen. I think more than anything, we talk about word counts, and we talk about outlining, and we also talk about kind of giving yourself parameters to stay on that path that you're writing on. And so that's with the Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Your Home, like setting out the exact outline we wanted, having word counts for each of the sections that we had, having the frameworks like we talked about earlier, like sense of each of the 5 senses to match up with each of the 5 big sections. Giving ourselves those parameters really helps keep focused. Would you have anything to add? Yeah.
Yeah, I do, because it's funny, when she dropped out, I would guess her connection went bad. I got a little pop-up that said, "You are the host now."
Oh, I'm the captain now.
So I'm the host now.
Awesome. Welcome to our sports show.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so much of it. Like it's weird that writing is one of these few like things where people
Hi, I'm back. I win.
Hi there.
Hi.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
No, it's
It
fine.
happens.
We just kept talking.
I figured, I was like, well, at least if I'm going to lose connection on any.
Oh no.
Oh no.
So
Oh, okay.
All right, keep going.
I'm just gonna keep going.
I'm still here. I'm just not going to change anything.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, writing is one of these weird things where, like, you get these books like How to Write a Novel, or people will be like, I've always wanted to write a novel. How do I do that? And novel is such like a big first step. And it's something you're probably only going to do successfully after years and years and years of practicing of writing. And so to me, it's a little bit like, I like buy a violin, and I'm like, and I also buy a book that says How to Write a Symphony. And I just am like, well, I've always wanted to write a symphony. So do you have any advice for how to write a symphony? Or like, even just like how to build a house.
Right.
It's a thing of like, it's totally possible to learn how to do, but I do think like you do that by working for years to build the basic skills and learning how to write, which is generally easy with shorter stuff. And then gradually you'll get to a point. I mean, I've been writing constantly most of my life. I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was 3 years old, and I started like dictating stories to my parents to type down. And I didn't successfully complete a novel draft until the Welcome to Night Vale novel when I was in my late 20s. And so I think, yeah, writing is one of those things where you just have to kind of do it for a long time before it reaches a point where it feels a little more doable.
And Jeffrey, how did you get bit by the writing bug? Joseph kind of shared a little bit about his, but how did that start for you?
When I was in elementary school, I do remember, and I always enjoyed writing things down, but I didn't really think much of it until when I was in 5th grade. I remember, we did a lot of reading, and on our library trips, we'd always have like our teacher would, she would pick books out that we would all read and stuff, and then we were allowed to students, if they had a book that they liked, they could recommend it, and everyone would read it, and then we'd talk about it. Anyways, but I remember. I'm trying to remember, there was a kid's book from like the 80s called Alexander's No Good, Terrible, Very Bad Day or something.
Yeah, they adapted into a movie recently. It was
There
horrible.
you go. I remember I just did a parody of that book, and I rewrote it, and I don't remember the name of it now, but my teacher thought it was really funny, and she asked me to read it, and so I didn't want to read it out loud, and so she read it out. She got permission and read it out loud, and everyone laughed, and I was that feeling of like, oh, this is amazing, getting to write something and people respond to it, and that's a lot of fun to do. So yeah, I was really into as a kid, I was really into humor columnists. My grandparents had a bunch of like Irma Bombeck and Louis Grizzard and Dave Barry and people like that. So I read all of those books and I loved them, and I really thought someday I'm going to be a humor columnist at a newspaper. That's what I'm going to be. Yeah, and then in college I took theater classes, and once I got the playwriting bug, that really stuck, and I started really in college was when I really hunkered down and started taking writing seriously and doing it on a regular basis.
Well, as a fellow theater major, I can understand that and appreciate that, and glad to see that there's another successful theater person.
I don't know if I'm successful at theater, but I did do a popular podcast. I never quite made the theater thing.
I don't know. You're doing something with the degree.
I am. It's great.
My wife is a theater major, and she refers to it as her degree in make pretend.
Yes. I called it my BA and BS.
Mm-hmm.
That was mine.
That's good.
So I want to turn it over now. We have some questions that we got on our Instagram, and also if you're watching this live, feel free to put any questions in the chat. I have that up here, so we can, if you have any questions for Jeffrey or Joseph, feel free to ask them about the book, about the podcast. They've been very open and wonderful so far. One of the ones that we got on Instagram was, what's next for you guys? What are you working on right now? I think they may be meant about novels and books, but you can answer that in any way you want to.
Just trying to get through the weeks.
Oh, amen to that.
We have I've been working on, like, books we're starting to work on stuff on my side. I don't have anything I think that is in a condition to talk about publicly yet.
That's okay.
But the main thing I've been working on lately is speaking of getting through the weeks, I started a podcast called Our Plague Year that is about this moment in history, and it's writers and non-writers, just people calling into our voicemail from all over the country and the world, just kind of collectively telling the story of what's happening right now, and trying to kind of just have it be a space where we can sort of emotionally deal with. It's not like a breaking news or news discussion podcast. It's more of a like space to just sit with it a little bit. I've heard from a lot of people that it's been helpful for them, which has been the entire goal. So if that feels like it would be helpful to you, it's called Our Plague Year.
It's been really beautiful, and Joseph's been doing 2 episodes a week with it, and the Monday episodes have been featuring, written stories that recorded by various writers. And the first episode features Cory Doctorow and Nisi Shaw, and so yeah, some of these stories are really fascinating, and it's really great, and some really really fun framing of how to interpret what's happening, all the way to just personal stories. My co-writer of the Within the Wires podcast, Janina Matthewson, she had a story in the episode from this week that she's from Christchurch, New Zealand, so it talks a little bit about the earthquake in 2010. And but then a couple weeks ago, Joseph started adding these phone calls from people that they're really lovely, they're really really beautiful, and some of them are heartbreaking, some of them are uplifting, but they're all like, they're just very comforting. It was this, I remember Joseph telling me the idea for this kind of as like mid-March, as kind of quarantine was sort of becoming reality for all of the country, that I think I'm gonna put this together. And he put it together, and a week later we have these really beautiful podcast episodes, and I think they're really fantastic. Yeah, I don't have anything I can announce that's in condition to describe here that I'm working on, but I have another book that I'm working on with a friend of mine, and Joseph and I have a couple of little projects in the works too that are in very, very early
We have a
form.
meeting on Friday to
Yeah, we have a
discuss
meeting
a
on
book
Friday.
type thing.
Uh-huh.
Awesome. Well, I wish you best of luck with that. We have
Thanks.
a comment from Ariel Shapiro, who said, I just wanted to say that I'm thankful for your Jewish representation. I feel like most shows I consume are great about diversity in race, gender, and sexuality, but most don't do much about religion. She wanted to say thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I was going to say, when we were talking about the side characters, that Rivka was one that felt really important to me because, I don't write directly about Judaism that much, but it's something that informs a lot of what I write and think. And so being able to write, I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, and so writing about a character that is kind of my family's history was super interesting for me. And it was one that she's definitely a character that I would have loved to have had more space for, but just didn't really serve the story. I will say that there's a point where we go to a synagogue in Lithuania, I think. It's a wooden synagogue, and then the inside is painted beautifully. And I would encourage everyone to look up that synagogue. It's a real synagogue. It no longer exists. It was burned down by the Nazis. But the reason I know about it is I went to the Jewish Museum in Warsaw, and they've done a complete reconstruction of the interior of that synagogue there. And it really is one of the most extraordinary religious structures I've ever seen. It's just really beautiful.
See, you did do research. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Jewish history stuff I just kind of already know for other reasons, so it doesn't require a lot of.
Is it the
that really is one of the most compelling. She's so great.
Was it the Great Choral Synagogue in Riga?
No,
okay.
It is
in Riga, isn't it?
Okay,
I'm like looking around for a book.
It is. I can tell you the page that it's on.
Oh wow.
Because we were just talking about there's a.
Oh, it's disappearing. There we go.
You gotta move it forward.
There we go. Oh no, it's because it's blue. It's
Yeah.
Okay, so the reason I know this page is because there's a printer error on it. So just a heads up on that. But on page 257, it is the start of chapter 6 of part 4.
Mm-hmm.
The village of Gwoździec, and the printer error is that there is a Z with an accent in that village name that somehow just disappeared. In the final version, there's just a blank space where it was supposed to be. Somehow the foreign characters in the book all got somehow reformatted. It's a little embarrassing, but that village, if you look up that village and synagogue, you can find pictures of it. Page 257.
Great.
That's amazing. I'm going to end on this question here, which is, obviously you're doing this amazing podcast for what's going on, but we had a couple of people reach out just asking how you're doing during this time and during this weird crisis, and just to check in with some of their favorite creators. And I think we had at least 2 or 3 people ask just, how are you doing?
How you doing, Jeffrey?
Fine. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot, right? There's so much like that. It's not even related to the plague, as it were, in life, that when you deal with sort of, I don't want to get into a lot of specifics because this isn't my therapy time here, but there's a thing where, like, and I think we all have these things. I'm not the only one with non-plague related things, but they become heightened right during this time. And so it's always this exercise of just remembering to sort of take day at a time and just think these are the things I'm doing today. These are the things that I'm very lucky to do. I get very excited doing these online book events because while I'm really bummed that our book came out right as there's a plague happening, and it's so damaging to so many authors' livelihoods, including our own, I am also just
Oh,
really I look forward to this thing all day because I'm very thankful that we have this job that we get to get online and people ask us questions and say thank you to us, and we get to meet you for the first time, Mikaley, in Denver, Colorado, from here in the
Well,
Hudson Valley, New York, and you've read our book and you liked it, and that's
I
just like,
did.
what a cool dang job I have. So these are the things, these are the balances, the extreme ups and downs of every day. So in general, at any given moment, I'm never fine, but on average, I'm fine.
How about you, Joseph?
I think that was a very good answer that I don't want to like muddle too much with a follow-up.
That's okay.
Oh, it's been up and down. It's both my and my wife's birthdays this week, and so it's very weird to have a birthday where you can't leave the house. And we made a this really beautiful carrot cake for herself because that was kind of what she wanted to do, was bake a cake all day. And then we ate half of it in 2 days on our own, and then we realized we had to put it away. But it's just weird to have, you bake this cake and then there's no one to share it with. Yeah, it's been this balance of like personal problems that are personal, and then also, yeah, the business of art is really heavily impacted, and so trying to figure out how to make this work. And it's also been really beautiful because we tried to be transparent about that with our fans of like, listen, our tours all got postponed and our merch company is having to work on a very limited capacity. So if you can donate, now would be the time. And they really did. There was a huge influx of new donations, even at a time in which all of us are financially struggling. And so that made us feel really good. It felt like we were falling a little bit and people actually caught us. And that was a really nice feeling to have right now at this time in which we're all so separated. It felt a little bit like this point of contact, and it was nice to have.
Yeah, that's thank you for that, and thank you both for your honesty. I know that these are weird times, but we're really grateful to have you because we weren't on your tour originally to come to Denver, and so we got you in this manner, which we just were super excited about. And I know that our viewers here, we have a last comment from Jessica Borg, who said, "This book was wonderful. Thank you for continuing to tell your stories. They mean everything to me."
Oh,
And
thanks, Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah. And I think that, a lot of us feel very similarly in that, as I mentioned at the beginning, art is essential, and you guys are artists and storytellers. And so we cannot thank you enough for the things that you do and what you have given us during this time, this beautiful piece of art, which I wish I had. It's on my phone because you should listen to it, because Mara Wilson does an amazing job. Yes.
I have to hold it here because if I hold it here, it just
disappears. Yeah.
Well, you can listen to The Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Your Home. Mara Wilson does the narration, which, if you don't know who she is an amazing Twitter goddess who just is hilarious, incredible. You might recognize her from when she was a child actor in her own book, which I'm blanking on the name of, but it's also really good.
Where Am I Now? I think
Thank you. Where Am I Now? Yes. So you can listen to it and support at libro.fm. and get your audiobooks from there. You can also get The Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Your Home. For the love of God, I love your title, but having to say it 7 times over is hard. You can get The Faceless Old Woman Who Secretly Lives in Your Home at tatteredcover.com. And we're just, thank you both so much. I really appreciate this conversation. It was so much fun. And I hope that you guys will get to come to Denver for book 4 or another one, or live shows.
So too.
I would love to go back out into the world. Yes.
Yes, let's go back out in the world very soon.
I'd love to be in Denver. Yes. Mikaley, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you guys again, and we look forward to seeing you all. Thank you. We have our next live stream, like I said, on Thursday, the 23rd, which is the Choose Your Own Adventure Writing Workshop with Kashmir and Factor, which I think is just going to be so much fun. And it's for all ages, too.
That sounds great.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Everyone.
Good night. Bye.
Not anymore. And there we go. Thank you.